The shuttle docked with a soft hiss, and Vila stepped onto Nexus Station for the first time. Her four legs clicked against the metal floor as she walked, her antennae twitching at the strange mix of smells in the air. The station was home to dozens of species, and each one left their mark on the recycled atmosphere. Vila was, and she was proud of it. Her people were ancient. They had built starships when most species were still learning to make fire. Her exoskeleton was the color of dark bronze, hard enough to stop a blade, and her compound eyes could see in spectrums that other races could not even imagine. She stood taller than most beings on the station, and she carried herself like someone who knew her own worth. She was here as a junior diplomatic officer, sent to observe and learn. The High Council wanted to understand the newer species that were joining galactic society. Vila had studied their files, memorized their customs, and prepared herself for the assignment. She expected it to be boring but educational. What she did not expect was humans. She saw her first one within minutes of boarding the station. He was standing near a cargo bay, checking something on it. He was soft. That was her first thought. No shell, no scales, no natural armor of any kind. Just pale skin stretched over meat and bone. He was shorter than her, and his eyes were small and forward-facing like a prey animal. He looked up as she passed, and he smiled at her. Vila did not smile back. She did not see the point. Her quarters were small but acceptable. She unpacked her things and reviewed her schedule. There was an orientation meeting in 2 hours, followed by a tour of the station. She would meet representatives from several species, including the humans who had become surprisingly common in this sector of space. Vila did not understand why anyone paid attention to humans. They had only been traveling between stars for a few centuries. They were bobbies compared to Their bodies were fragile, they were short, and they had no natural weapons. By all logic, they should have stayed on there and left space travel to species that were better suited for it. But somehow, humans were everywhere. They had spread across dozens of worlds in a remarkably short time. They formed alliances with older species, traded goods and ideas, and inserted themselves into galactic politics as if they belonged there. It annoyed Vila in a way she could not fully explain. The orientation meeting was held in a large room near the center of the station. Vila found a seat near the back and watched the other attendees file in. They were tall and covered in green scales, their claws clicking as they walked. They were small and quick, with fur the color of silver. There were beings she did not recognize, species from distant sectors she had never visited. And there were humans. A small group of them sat near the front. They talked quietly among themselves, laughing at jokes Vila could not hear. One of them was a female with black hair and warm brown eyes. She turned and noticed Vila watching. Instead of looking away, she waved. Vila's antennae flattened in confusion. She did not wave back. The meeting was led by an administrator, a being with gray skin and too many arms. He explained the rules of the station, the expectations for diplomatic guests, and the schedule for the coming weeks. Vila listened with half her attention while studying the humans in front of her. They were so strange. They fidgeted constantly, shifting in their seats, touching their faces, tapping their fingers. They could not seem to hold still. One of the males kept bouncing his leg up and down for no reason she could determine. It was distracting and primitive. After the meeting ended, Vila moved toward the exit. The human female intercepted her before she could leave. "Hello," the female said. Her voice was pleasant and her smile seemed genuine. I work in the medical bay here. You are, yes. I have never met one of your people before." Vila studied her. Up close, the human looked even more fragile. Her skin was thin enough that Vila could see the blood vessels beneath it. Her hands had no claws, just soft fingers with flat nails. She was small and breakable. "I am Officer Vila," she said. "I am here for diplomatic observation." "That is wonderful," said. "If you need anything during your stay, please let me know. Humans and have not worked together much, but I hope we can change that." Vila did not know what to say to this, so she said nothing, did not seem offended by her silence. The human simply smiled again and walked away to join her colleagues. Later that evening, Vila found herself in one of the station's common areas. She was reviewing reports on her when she heard voices nearby. A group of traders were sitting at a table, drinking something that smelled strong and talking loudly. "I am telling you," one of them said, "humans are not to be taken lightly. I saw what they did during the Frontier War. They are crazy." Another trader laughed. "They are small and squishy. What could they possibly do?" "I watched a human soldier take a plasma bolt to the chest," the first trader said. "He fell down. I thought he was dead, but then he got back up. He got back up and kept fighting. He killed 3 enemy soldiers before he finally collapsed, and he survived. He is still alive today." The other traders murmured in disbelief. One of them shook his head. "That is impossible. No species can survive that kind of damage." "Humans can," the first trader insisted. "They do not know when to die. It is like their bodies refuse to give up even when they should." Vila listened to this conversation with growing amusement. She had heard stories like this before. Every new species tried to make themselves seem more impressive than they really were. Humans were no different. They spread tales of their own toughness because they had nothing else to offer. She stood up and walked over to the table. The traders looked up at her with surprise. "I could not help but hear your conversation," she said. "I must say, you should not believe such obvious propaganda. Humans are fragile creatures. They have no armor, no claws, no venom. They are prey animals pretending to be predators. These stories you tell are nothing but myths designed to make a weak species seem relevant." The first trader stared at her. "You have never seen a human fight," he said. "I do not need to," Vila replied. "I have studied their biology. I know what they are capable of, and it is not much." She walked away before they could respond, feeling satisfied with herself. She returned to her quarters and prepared for sleep, not knowing that the universe was about to prove her very, very wrong. 3 weeks passed on Nexus Station, and Vila settled into a routine. She attended meetings, observed diplomatic exchanges, and wrote reports for the High Council. The work was not exciting, but it was steady. She learned the layout of the station, memorized the schedules of different species, and began to understand the complex web of politics that held everything together. But through it all, she could not stop watching the humans. It was not admiration. It was curiosity. The same kind of curiosity a scientist might feel when studying an insect under glass. She wanted to understand why so many species treated humans with respect they did not deserve. The station had a training area on the lower deck. Different species used it for exercise and combat practice. Vila went there sometimes to maintain her own skills. Her exoskeleton needed regular movement to stay flexible, and she enjoyed the feeling of her body working at full capacity. It was there that she first noticed. He was a human male, average height for his species, with short black hair and a face that rarely showed emotion. He worked in station security, though Vila did not understand why. What could a human possibly protect? He did not seem strong or fast or dangerous. He seemed ordinary in every way. But he was always training. Every time Vila visited the training area was there. He lifted heavy weights, pulling and pushing metal over and over again. He ran on machines until sweat poured down his body. He practiced fighting movements against training dummies, punching and kicking and grappling for hours. His clothes would become soaked, his breathing would grow heavy, and still he would not stop. Vila found it strange. They did not train this way. Their bodies were naturally strong and fast. They practiced skill and technique, but they did not punish themselves with endless repetition. What was the point of working so hard when your body was made of soft meat that would never be truly strong? One day she saw finish his training session. He had been working for 3 hours straight. He sat down on a bench and drank water, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His arms were shaking from exhaustion. Walked in and sat beside him. She handed him a towel and said something that made him smile. It was the first time Vila had seen smile. It changed his face, made him look younger and softer. Then the moment passed, and his expression returned to its usual calm. Vila noticed that the two humans seemed close. They ate meals together in the common area. They talked quietly during breaks. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity that suggested years of friendship. Vila wondered if they were mated, but human relationships confused her. They did not follow any pattern she could understand. A few days later, Vila witnessed something that puzzled her even more. Was a young human who worked as an engineer on the station. He was cheerful and loud, always smiling, always talking. He seemed to get along with everyone, even species that did not normally tolerate others. Vila found him irritating but harmless. She was walking through the engineering section when she saw him working on a broken power conduit. He was reaching deep into the machinery when something sparked. There was a flash of light and a sharp cracking sound. Yanked his arm back with a cry of pain. Vila expected him to go to the medical bay. She expected him to stop working and treat his injury. Any wound was taken seriously. Their exoskeletons protected them from most damage, so when they did get hurt, it meant something had gone very wrong. But just looked at his burned arm, shook his head and laughed. He laughed. His skin was red and blistered, clearly painful, and he was laughing about it. That was stupid, he said to himself. He wrapped a cloth around the burn and went right back to work. He finished the repair, tested the power conduit, and only then did he walk toward the medical bay, still chuckling at his own mistake. Vila did not understand. Was he in shock? Was there something wrong with human pain response, or did humans simply not care about their own bodies? She added this observation to her mental file and continued her research. The next week, Commander held a cultural exchange session. He was the senior human officer on the station, a tall man with gray hair and a calm voice. Vila attended because it was required, not because she expected to learn anything useful. Stood at the front of the room and talked about human history. He showed images on a large screen, cities in ruins, bodies on battlefields, clouds of smoke rising from burning forests. Our planet tried to kill us many times, said. Ice ages froze our ancestors. Diseases wiped out millions. We fought wars against each other that destroyed entire nations. We poisoned our own air and water until we almost made our world unlivable. The images kept changing. Disasters, famines, plagues, explosions. Vila watched with growing horror. How could any species survive all of this? How could any species do this to themselves? But we are still here, continued. Every time the universe tried to end us, we found a way to survive. We adapted. We learned. We refused to accept extinction. In the audience raised his clawed hand. How? He asked. Your species has no natural advantages. You are not strong or fast or armored. How did you survive when so many others died? Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we are stubborn. When something tries to kill us, we do not accept it. We fight back. We change. We endure. And eventually we win. The room was silent. Vila looked at the human commander and felt something she did not expect. Not respect. Not yet. But uncertainty. A tiny crack in her confidence. She pushed the feeling away. Words were easy. Anyone could give a speech about strength and survival. It did not mean anything. Humans were still fragile. They were still weak. They were still prey animals who had somehow stumbled into space. After the session ended, Vila walked past on her way out. He nodded at her politely. Officer Vila, he said, I hope you found the presentation interesting. It was informative, she replied carefully, though I wonder if some of the stories were exaggerated for effect. Looked at her with calm eyes. I only told the truth, he said. In fact, I left out the worst parts. Some things are too heavy for a cultural exchange. He walked away before Vila could respond. She stood there for a moment, her antennae twitching with irritation. She did not believe him. She could not believe him, because if what he said was true, then everything she knew about humans was wrong. And Vila was never wrong. She returned to her quarters and wrote her report. She described the humans as primitive but socially adept. She noted their strange training habits and their unusual tolerance for pain. She concluded that they were unremarkable and posed no threat to interests. She sent the report and went to sleep, comfortable in her certainty. But somewhere deep in her mind, a question had taken root, a small doubt that would not go away. She ignored it because doubt was weakness and Vila was strong. She had no idea that her certainty was about to shatter. The attack came without warning. Vila was in the diplomatic wing, reviewing trade documents, when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flashed across the ceiling. A mechanical voice announced emergency protocols in 6 different languages. The station shuddered as something heavy struck the outer hull. She moved quickly to the nearest security terminal and scanned the feeds. Her blood turned cold when she saw what was happening. Raiders, at least 15 of them. They had docked a stolen cargo ship at the trading bay and forced their way inside. They moved through the corridors in tight formation, their massive bodies filling the hallways. Each one stood over 2 meters tall, covered in thick green scales that could stop most weapons. Their eyes were yellow and filled with hunger. Their claws were stained with old blood. Were mercenaries. They worked for the highest bidder and took what they wanted when no one was paying. They had no honor and no limits. They were the kind of species that other species feared. Vila watched them take control of the trading bay. They gathered hostages quickly, shoving terrified beings against the walls. She counted the prisoners, traders, workers, a few delegates who had been negotiating a supply contract. And humans. She saw among them, her face pale but calm. The human medic was holding the hand of a young child, keeping the little one quiet. Even in danger, she was taking care of others. The lead was bigger than the rest. He had scars across his snout and metal implants in his arms. He spoke into a communication device, his voice rough and cruel. "We have your people," he said. "We want fuel, credits, and safe passage out of this sector. You have 1 hour. For every 10 minutes you are late, we kill a hostage." He grabbed one of the delegates and threw him to the ground. The curled into a defensive ball, his exoskeleton cracking under the impact. The laughed and kicked him aside. Vila's mandibles clicked with rage. Those were her people, and she could do nothing to help them. She was not a soldier. She had basic combat training like all officers, but she was not built for fighting. Her exoskeleton was strong, but scales were stronger. Her claws were sharp, but claws were sharper. If she tried to fight them, she would die. The station's security forces were mobilizing, but they were outnumbered and they had chosen their moment well. Half the security team was off duty. The other half was scattered across different sections of the station. By the time they organized a response, the hostages might already be dead. Vila left the diplomatic wing and moved through the corridors, staying low and quiet. She wanted to see what was happening with her own eyes. She needed to understand the situation. Maybe there was something she could do. Maybe there was some way to help. She reached a maintenance corridor that ran alongside the trading bay. Through a small window, she could see the hostages huddled together. The patrolled among them, weapons ready, eyes scanning for any sign of resistance. That was when she saw. He came around a corner fast, his security uniform damp with sweat. He must have been in the training area when the attack started. He carried a standard sidearm and a combat knife, nothing that would make a difference against armor. His face was tight with worry. Another human security officer ran up to him. She was breathing hard and her hands were shaking. "They have the trading bay," she said. 15 hostiles, maybe more. They are too strong. We cannot take them head on." "Who is inside?" asked. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that Vila did not recognize. The officer checked her. 43 hostages confirmed, and, she paused, is in there. She was treating a patient when they hit. Went still, completely still, like a machine that had suddenly stopped running. Are you sure? He asked. Yes, I saw her on the security feed. Nodded slowly. He looked down at his weapon, then at the corridor leading to the trading bay. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. His shoulders squared. His breathing steadied. His eyes became focused in a way that made Vila uncomfortable. Tell Commander I am going in, he said. The officer stared at him. Going in, alone? That is suicide. There are 15 of them. They have armor and plasma weapons. You cannot possibly. Tell the Commander, repeated. I will create a distraction. When I do, send everyone you have. No, we need to wait for reinforcements. We need a plan. Is in there. He said it simply, like it explained everything. I am not waiting. He turned and walked away before she could stop him. He moved toward a maintenance shaft that Vila knew led to the trading bay's upper level. He was really going to do it. He was really going to attack 15 warriors by himself. Vila should have gone back to the diplomatic wing. She should have found a safe place to hide and waited for the situation to resolve. That was the smart thing to do. That was what an officer would do. But she did not do that. Instead, she followed. She stayed far enough back that he would not notice her, moving through the shadows on her 4 silent legs. She told herself she was gathering intelligence. She told herself she wanted to see what would happen, but the truth was simpler than that. She wanted to watch him die. It was cruel, she knew, but some part of her needed to see it. She needed proof that she was right about humans. She needed to watch this foolish, fragile creature throw himself at an enemy he could not defeat. She needed to see him fall so she could stop thinking about him, so she could stop wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was something more to humans than she believed. Reached the maintenance shaft and began climbing. Vila found a parallel route, moving through ventilation ducts that were large enough for her body. She emerged on a catwalk above the trading bay, hidden in the shadows of the ceiling supports. Below her, the hostages waited in fear, the paste among them like predators circling prey. The leader was talking on his communicator again, making more demands, more threats. Sat near the center of the group, still holding the child. Her face was calm, but Vila could see her hands trembling slightly. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. Any rational being would be afraid. Movement caught Vila's eye, had reached the upper level. He crouched behind a stack of cargo containers, studying the layout below. He was outnumbered and completely alone. Vila settled into her hiding spot and waited. She told herself she was doing the right thing. She was an observer, not a fighter. This was not her battle. But as she watched prepare to throw himself into impossible odds, she felt something she had never felt before when looking at a human. She felt afraid. Not for herself, for him. And that confused her more than anything, moved like smoke. Vila watched him slip from shadow to shadow, making no sound, leaving no trace. He descended from the upper level through a gap in the cargo containers, dropping silently to the floor behind a guard who was watching the hostages. They never saw him coming. Snipe found the soft spot beneath this jaw, where scales gave way to vulnerable flesh. The blade went in fast and came out faster. They made a wet choking sound and collapsed, caught the body before it could hit the ground and lowered it gently, silently. 1 down, 14 to go. Vila's mandibles parted in shock. She had never seen anything die so quickly or so quietly. They had been huge, armored, and armed with enough firepower to destroy a small vehicle, and a human had killed him in less than 2 seconds with nothing but a knife. But this was just one kill. Surely the others would notice. Surely they would overwhelm him now. They did notice. On the far side of the room looked toward where his comrade had been standing and saw nothing. He growled a warning to the others. Weapons came up. Yellow eyes scanned the shadows. Was already moving. He burst from behind the cargo containers with his sidearm blazing. The weapon was small and underpowered compared to plasma guns, but he aimed for eyes, for throats, for the gaps between scales where flesh was exposed. Two more fell before they could react. One clutched at his ruined eye socket. The other gurgled and collapsed with a hole in his neck. The room exploded into chaos. The remaining opened fire. Plasma bolts screamed through the air, burning holes in walls and melting cargo containers. Hostages screamed and dove for cover. The air filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Should have died in that first barrage. By every law of physics and biology, he should have been reduced to ash. But he was not standing still. He was not where they were shooting. He moved in ways that Vila could not comprehend. Not with the cold efficiency of combat, where every motion was calculated and precise. Fought like something wild, something desperate. He rolled and ducked and twisted, always one step ahead of the plasma bolts that tried to find him. He used the cargo containers as cover, bouncing from one to another like a stone skipping across water. A rushed him with claws extended, dropped low, letting the claws pass over his head and drove his knife up into the stomach. The blade punched through scale and muscle and twisted it before pulling it free. The screamed and fell. 4 down, 11 to go. Blood sprayed across face. His own or his enemy's, Vila could not tell. He did not wipe it away. He did not slow down. He grabbed the fallen's plasma pistol and added it to his arsenal, now firing with both hands. They were scared. Vila could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. They had expected easy prey. They had expected soft, weak humans who would cower and beg. Instead, they had found something else. Something that refused to be prey. "Kill him," the leader roared. "He is just one human, kill him." 3 charged at once. Shot 2 of them before they reached him, but the third was too fast. A massive clawed hand caught across the chest and sent him flying into a wall. He hit hard and dropped to the ground. Vila's breath caught. This was it. This was where he died. But got up. His uniform was torn. Blood seeped through the fabric where claws had raked his flesh. His breathing was ragged and one arm hung at a wrong angle, but he got up. He steadied himself against the wall, raised his weapons, and kept fighting. The who had hit him stared in disbelief. That blow should have broken bones, should have ruptured organs, should have ended the fight. Answered the stare with a plasma bolt through this left eye. 7 down, 8 to go. Vila could not look away. Her mind was trying to process what she was seeing, trying to fit it into her understanding of the universe and failing completely. Humans were weak. Humans were fragile. Humans were prey animals. This was what she knew. This was what she believed. But the creature fighting below her was not weak. It was not fragile. It was something ancient and terrible, something that had crawled out of a death world and refused to die. A plasma bolt caught in the shoulder. He stumbled, smoke rising from the wound, and for a moment Vila thought he would finally fall. But he turned the stumble into a roll, came up behind a cargo container, and used the brief cover to reload his weapons. His hands were shaking, his face was pale, blood dripped from a dozen wounds. Any other species would have stopped, would have surrendered, would have accepted that the fight was over. Attacked again. He was slower now. The damage was taking its toll, but he was not stopping. He emerged from cover with both weapons firing, taking down 2 more before they could react. Then he was among them, too close for plasma guns, fighting with knife and fists and teeth. Vila saw him bite his throat, saw him tear at scales with his bare hands, saw him take hits that would have killed any and keep fighting as if pain was just a suggestion his body could ignore. The hostages were forgotten, the demands were forgotten. They were no longer fighting to win, they were fighting to survive. One by one they fell. The last 3 tried to flee. They ran for the exit, abandoning their weapons, abandoning everything, chased them. He caught the first one in the doorway and brought him down with a knife to the spine. The second made it 10 meters into the corridor before a plasma bolt found the back of his skull. The third was the leader, the biggest, the strongest. He ran faster than the others, his powerful legs carrying him toward the docking bay where his ship waited. Followed. Vila lost sight of them as they disappeared down the corridor. She waited, her heart's pounding, her antennae trembling. For a long moment there was only silence. Then a sound, a roar of rage and pain, a crash, another crash, then nothing. Vila moved. She climbed down from her hiding spot and ran toward the corridor, ignoring every instinct that told her to stay hidden. She had to see. She had to know. She found them near the docking bay entrance. The leader was dead on the floor, his throat torn out, his claws still wet with blood. Standing over him he was destroyed. There was no other word for it. His uniform was more red than any other color. His left arm dangled uselessly at his side. His face was a mask of blood and burns. He swayed on his feet, barely conscious, kept upright by nothing but will. He saw Vila watching him. Their eyes met. She expected anger or fear or triumph, but there was none of that in his gaze, just exhaustion and relief. He whispered, "Is she safe?" Before Vila could answer, his legs gave out. He collapsed to the floor and did not move. Station security arrived moments later. They found 15 dead and 1 human lying in a pool of his own blood. They found 43 hostages, shaken but alive. They found running toward the corridor, screaming his name. Vila stood in the middle of it all, unable to speak, unable to move. Everything she had believed about humans was burning to ash in her mind. She had come to watch him die. Instead, she had watched him become something impossible. The medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Vila stood outside the main treatment room, watching through a window as doctors worked on his broken body. They had been at it for hours now. The human medical staff moved with calm urgency, their faces tight with focus. She had not left the medical wing since the attack. She could not explain why. Her duties were elsewhere. Her reports were waiting. The High Council would want to know what had happened, but she could not make herself walk away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, rising after being thrown into a wall, fighting through plasma burns, covered in blood that was mostly his own, refusing to stop, refusing to fall, refusing to die. The doctors finally stepped back. One of them, a gray-haired human woman, said something to her colleagues. They nodded and began cleaning up. The surgery, or whatever they called it, was over. Was sitting in a chair near the treatment room door. She had been there since they brought in. Her hands were clasped together and her eyes were red from crying. But she was not crying now. She was just waiting. The gray-haired doctor came out and approached her, stood up immediately. "How is he?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but Vila could hear the fear underneath. "Stable," the doctor said. 4 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, second-degree burns across 20% of his body, severe blood loss, internal bleeding that we had to repair surgically." She paused. "By all rights, he should be dead. The damage was catastrophic." Closed her eyes, "But he is not dead." "No, he is not." The doctor shook her head slowly. "I have been a physician for 30 years. I have never seen anyone survive injuries like this. His body just refused to give up. We had to restart his heart twice. Both times it started beating again on its own before we finished the procedure." "That sounds like," said quietly. The doctor put a hand on shoulder. "He will need weeks of recovery, maybe months, but he will live. He is too stubborn to do anything else." Laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "Can I see him?" "He is unconscious and will be for some time, but yes, you can sit with him." Went into the treatment room. Vila watched her sit beside's recovery pod, taking his hand in hers. The human's eyes were closed. his face peaceful despite all the tubes and machines connected to his body. Vila stayed by the window for a long time. She was not sure what she was waiting for. Perhaps she was waiting for to wake up so she could ask him how. How did he do it? How did he survive? How did he fight through pain that should have stopped him? Eventually, noticed her watching. The human woman rose and came to the door. "Officer Vila," she said, "you have been standing there for hours. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Vila shook her head. "I am undamaged. I was merely—" She stopped. She did not know how to finish that sentence. Studied her with those soft brown eyes. "You saw the fight," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes. And now you have questions." Vila's antennae twitched. "I have studied human biology," she said. "I know your physical limits. What I saw should have been impossible. He should have died a dozen times. How is he still alive?" Was quiet for a moment. Then she gestured toward a pair of chairs near the window. "Sit with me. I will try to explain." They sat together, the officer and the human medic, looking through the window at the unconscious man in the recovery pod. "Humans are not strong," began. "You are right about that. Our bodies are soft and fragile compared to many species. We have no armor, no claws, no venom. By every logical measure, we should have gone extinct long ago." "Then how did you survive?" Vila asked. "We evolved differently. Our planet was dangerous. Everything wanted to kill us. Predators, weather, disease, even other humans. We could not fight these threats with strength, so we developed something else." Tapped the side of her head. "Our minds learned to control our bodies in extreme situations. We call it the survival response." "I do not understand." "When a human faces death, our brain releases chemicals that change everything. Pain becomes distant. Fear becomes focus. Our hearts beat faster, pushing more blood to our muscles. Our bodies burn through energy reserves that are normally protected. We become faster, stronger, and much harder to kill." Vila thought about what she had witnessed, taking hits that should have crippled him, fighting through injuries that should have left him unconscious. This is a chemical reaction. "Partly, but there is more to it than chemistry," looked at sleeping form. "Humans also have something we call willpower. It is not a physical thing. You cannot measure it or quantify it, but it is real. When something matters enough to a human, when we are fighting for something we love, we can push past limits that should be absolute." "Fighting for something you love," Vila repeated slowly. "And I have been friends since childhood. We grew up together, we trained together, we came to this station together." His voice softened. "I was in that room with the hostages. He knew that if he did not act, I would die, and for that was not an option." Vila considered this. Among the personal attachments were acknowledged but never prioritized. The collective mattered more than the individual. No would throw their life away for a single friend. But had done exactly that. He had attacked 15 armed warriors alone because someone he cared about was in danger, and somehow, impossibly, he had won. "He should have waited for backup," Vila said. "He should have been logical. He should have calculated the odds and recognized that they were against him." "Yes," agreed. "That would have been the rational thing to do." "Then why did he not do it?" Smiled sadly. "Because humans are not always rational. When someone we love is in danger, we stop thinking about odds. We stop caring about our own survival. We act." She paused. "Is that weakness? Maybe. But it is also the reason we are still here. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We fight until we win or until we die, and sometimes we refuse to die even when we should." Vila sat in silence, processing this information. It did not fit into any category she knew. The valued logic and calculation above all else. They would never sacrifice themselves for one individual. They would never fight against impossible odds when retreat was available. But perhaps that was why they had never inspired fear in other species. They were respected. They were ancient, but they were not feared. Humans were. Vila looked at through the window. He seemed so small in the recovery pod, so ordinary. But she had seen what he was capable of. She had seen the monster that lived inside that fragile human body. "I owe him an apology," she said. Raised an eyebrow. "An apology?" "I said things about humans. I called your species weak and your stories propaganda. I laughed at the myths of human warriors." Vila's voice was quiet. "I was wrong." Did not gloat or lecture. She simply nodded. Would not care about an apology. He does not fight for recognition or praise. He fights because it is who he is. She stood up and looked at Vila with kindness. "But I think he would appreciate it anyway." Vila stayed in the medical bay until the station lights dimmed for the night cycle. She watched sitting beside, holding his hand, waiting for him to wake up. She thought about everything she had seen and heard. The myths were not myths. The stories were not exaggerations. Humans were exactly what the traders had described, perhaps even more. She had so much to learn. Vila began her research the next morning. She locked herself in her quarters and accessed every database she could find. Scientific journals, historical archives, military records, anything that mentioned humans. She read for hours, days, absorbing information that shattered her old beliefs one piece at a time. She learned about persistence hunting. Before humans developed weapons, before they built cities or invented fire, they hunted by chasing their prey across vast distances. Other predators were faster, stronger, and more deadly. But humans had something else. They had endurance. A human could run for hours without stopping. Their bodies were designed to shed heat through sweat, something most other Earth creatures could not do. When a faster animal sprinted away from them, humans would simply follow at a steady pace. They would track their prey across plains and through forests, never stopping, never resting, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion and heat. Humans were not apex predators because of speed or strength. They were apex predators because they did not quit. They wore down their enemies through sheer refusal to stop. Vila thought about in the trading bay. Injured, bleeding, burned, still fighting, still moving, still refusing to stop. She learned about the human immune system. It was constantly at war with itself. Humans lived with billions of tiny organisms inside their bodies, a complex ecosystem of bacteria and viruses that other species would find horrifying. Their immune systems had evolved to fight off diseases that would kill most beings instantly. They had survived plagues that wiped out large portions of their population, and each time, the survivors became stronger. Human bodies were not strong because they were well-made. They were strong because they had been forged in fire. Every generation had faced death and somehow found a way through it. She learned about their history. Wars, so many wars. Humans had been fighting each other since they first learned to hold weapons. They had developed increasingly destructive tools for killing their own kind, from stone clubs to weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash. And yet they survived. They kept surviving. They rebuilt after every disaster, adapted to every challenge, and continued spreading across their world and beyond. No other species in the galaxy had such a violent history. No other species had come so close to destroying themselves so many times and lived to tell about it. Vila began to understand something that made her deeply uncomfortable. Humans were not weak despite their soft bodies. They were strong because of them. Their fragility had forced them to evolve in ways that armored species never had to. They had developed resilience, adaptability, and a will to survive that bordered on madness. They had never faced extinction. Their exoskeletons protected them from the beginning. They had never needed to develop the desperation that drove human evolution. They had never learned to fight like their lives depended on it, because their lives had never truly been in danger. Humans had learned, humans had fought, humans had become something terrifying. A week after the attack, woke up. Vila found him sitting up in his recovery pod, eating some kind of human food that looked unappetizing. His injuries had healed remarkably fast. The humans called it their regenerative ability, another gift from their hostile. He was still wrapped in bandages and his movements were careful, but he was awake and alert. Was there, of course, she was always there. Vila approached slowly, unsure of what to say, looked up at her with calm eyes. There was no hostility in his expression, no recognition of what she had thought about his kind before. "Officer Vila," he said, his voice was rough but steady. "I heard you were watching from the catwalks." Vila felt a flash of shame. She had hidden while he fought. She had done nothing to help. "I was," she admitted. "I could not. I did not know what to do." Nodded. "That is understandable. You are not trained for combat. You would have died if you had tried to help." It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. Somehow that made Vila feel worse. "I came to apologize," she said. "Before the attack I said things about humans. I called you weak. I called your stories propaganda. I was wrong." Tilted his head slightly. "What changed your mind?" "I watched you fight." Vila's voice dropped low. "I watched you take wounds that should have killed you. I watched you get back up when you should have stayed down. I watched you fight like nothing I have ever seen before." "That was not anything special," said. "Any human would have done the same." Vila stared at him. "You believe that?" "I know that." Looked at, and something passed between them, an understanding that Vila could not quite grasp. "Was in danger. I had to get her out. There was no other option. No human would have just stood by and let someone they loved die." "But the odds were against you. 15 warriors. You were alone." "The odds do not matter when someone you care about is in danger." His expression did not change, but his voice grew softer. "My body wanted to stop. My brain was telling me I was going to die, but I could not stop. I could not let her die, so I kept going." Vila remembered words from days ago. Willpower. Something that could not be measured, or something that pushed humans past their physical limits into territory that should have been impossible. "How?" she asked. "How do you keep going when everything tells you to stop?" Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We do not think about it. When the moment comes when someone we love is in danger, our bodies and minds work together in ways we do not fully understand. We become more than we normally are, faster, stronger, harder to kill." "But afterwards," Vila pressed, "you nearly died. You were broken. How do you accept that? How do you live with the knowledge that you came so close to death?" Looked at her with something that might have been patience. "I did not die. I am still here. That is all that matters." He said it so simply, so calmly, as if surviving impossible odds was just another day for humans. Vila thought about the approach to death. Her people planned carefully, calculated risks, and when danger became too great, they preserved themselves because individual lives mattered to the collective. The idea of throwing oneself into certain death for a single person was alien to them. But humans were not. Humans came from a world that tried to kill them at every turn. They had evolved to value their loved ones above their own survival, because in the ancient past, protecting the group was the only way anyone survived. "I have been studying your species," Vila said. "I learned about persistence hunting, about your immune systems, about your history of wars and disasters and survival." "And what did you conclude?" asked. Vila chose her words carefully. "I concluded that they have been wrong about humans from the beginning. We thought your softness was weakness, but your softness forced you to become something else, something stronger than armor or claws or venom." Nodded slowly. "We became survivors." "Yes," Vila looked at him with new eyes. "You became something to fear." Smiled slightly. It was a tired smile, worn down by pain and exhaustion, but genuine. "We prefer not to be feared. We would rather be friends, but we will fight when we have to. And when we fight, we do not stop until the fight is over." Vila understood now. She understood in a way she had not before. Humans were not apex predators because they were the strongest or the fastest or the deadliest. They were apex predators because they never gave up. Because when everything was against them, when death seemed certain, they found a way to keep going. The myths were true, the stories were real, and Vila would never laugh at them again. 6 months passed. Vila completed her assignment on Nexus Station and prepared to return to the. She packed her belongings carefully, folding reports and organizing data chips that contained more information about humans than any had ever collected. Her quarters felt empty now, stripped of the small personal items she had accumulated during her stay. She had changed. She knew that. The Vila who had arrived on the station was not the Vila who was leaving it. Before she left, she found, and in the common area, they were eating lunch together, laughing at something it said. The young engineer waved at Vila when he saw her, his smile as bright as ever. His arm had healed completely from the burn he had suffered months ago. Looked almost normal now. The scars from his fight with the had faded to thin lines on his skin. He moved more carefully than before and said he still had pain on cold days, but he was alive. He was still standing. That was what mattered. Officer Vila said warmly, "We heard you are leaving today." "Yes, my transport departs in 2 hours." Vila stood awkwardly near their table, unsure of how to say goodbye. They did not have rituals for this. They simply left when their work was done. But these humans had taught her things. They had shown her truths she had never known. She wanted to acknowledge that somehow. "Thank you," she said finally, "for your patience, for answering my questions, for changing the way I see your species." Nodded, "You were willing to learn. That is more than most." "I was wrong about many things," Vila admitted. "I came here believing humans were weak and unimportant. I thought your stories were exaggerations designed to make you seem more impressive than you really were." She paused. "I know better now." Smiled. "We do not hold your earlier opinions against you. Many species think the same way when they first meet us. We have learned to prove ourselves through actions, not words." "You certainly proved yourselves to me." Vila said goodbye to each of them in turn. She shook hands with, having learned that humans appreciated this gesture. She bowed slightly too, a sign of respect among them. She even laughed at one of his jokes, though she did not fully understand it. Then she left. Her transport carried her away from Nexus Station, through the stars, back to the world where she was born. The High Council received her report 3 days after her arrival. They read it in silence, their compound eyes scanning the data she had gathered. When they finished, the eldest council member looked at her with something like surprise. "Your assessment of humans is very different from our current understanding," he said. "You describe them as dangerous, almost as apex predators. This contradicts centuries of observation." "Our observations were incomplete," Vila replied. "We studied their biology and saw weakness. We studied their technology and saw primitiveness. We never studied what truly makes them dangerous." "And what is that?" Vila thought about standing over the leader, covered in blood, barely conscious, asking if was safe. She thought about the determination in his eyes, the absolute refusal to surrender even when his body was broken. "Their will," she said, "their refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to die for what they love." The council members exchanged glances. They had ruled for generations. They had negotiated with hundreds of species. They thought they understood the galaxy. But they had never truly understood humans. Weeks later, Vila was assigned to teach at a military academy. Her job was to educate young officers about alien species they might encounter in their careers. She took the position seriously. One day, a group of her students were discussing humans in the recreation hall. Vila overheard them laughing, making the same jokes she had once made. "They are so small," one student said, "so fragile. They have no armor, no claws, no natural weapons. I do not understand why anyone takes them seriously." They are probably good at hiding, another laughed, running away from real predators. Vila walked over to them. Her students fell silent, recognizing the look on her face. I watched a single human kill 5 warriors, she said quietly. He was smaller than all of them. He was unarmed by their standards. By every logical measure, he should have died in seconds. The students stared at her. That is impossible, one of them said. I thought so too, until I saw it with my own eyes. Then how did he win? The first student asked. How could a human defeat 5 alone? Vila remembered the fight. She remembered moving through like a blade through water. She remembered him taking hits that should have ended him and refusing to fall. She remembered the look in his eyes when he asked about. Because humans do not fight like we do, she said. We fight to win. We calculate, we strategize, we retreat when the odds turn against us. We preserve ourselves because we value our lives. She paused, making sure every student was listening. Humans are different. When someone they love is in danger, they stop calculating. They stop caring about odds or survival. They become something else entirely. Something that does not stop. Something that does not surrender. Something that refuses to die until the fight is over. The recreation hall was silent. The students looked at her with wide eyes, trying to understand. We fight to win, Vila continued. Humans fight to protect. There is a difference. We will retreat if the cost is too high. Humans will keep fighting until they have nothing left, and then they will find more. Their bodies are fragile, but their spirits are made of something we cannot measure or understand. She thought of words from months ago. Willpower. That was the word. An invisible force that pushed humans past their limits, that made them capable of impossible things. Do not laugh at human warriors, Vila concluded. I made that mistake once. I watched the stories I mocked become reality before my eyes. I watched a single human fight like a demon from old legends, bleeding and broken and still refusing to fall. She looked at each of her students in turn. I will never make that mistake again, and neither should you. The students were quiet for a long moment. Then one of them, a young female with bright bronze markings, raised her hand. What happened to the human, she asked, the one who fought the... Vila smiled. It was a strange expression for her, but she had learned it from her time on the station. He survived, she said. He was badly wounded. The doctors said he should have died a dozen times, but he survived. He is still alive today, serving on the same station where I met him. How is that possible? Vila thought about the question. She thought about everything she had learned, everything she had witnessed, everything that had changed her understanding of what beings were capable of. Because he is human, she said simply, and humans do not give up. She left the recreation hall and walked alone through the academy corridors. Outside the windows, the stretch toward the horizon. Her people had built a civilization that spanned centuries. They had achieved greatness through logic and calculation and careful planning. But watching fight had taught her something important. Sometimes logic was not enough. Sometimes calculation failed. Sometimes the only thing that mattered was the willingness to keep going, no matter the cost. They had never learned that lesson. They had never needed to. Vila hoped they would never have to learn it the way she had, but she also knew that if they ever faced a true threat, the humans would be there beside them, fighting, bleeding, refusing to die. Because that was what humans did. They endured, they survived, they won. And anyone who laughed at them would learn the truth eventually. Just as she had,